What's up? Let's talk about wrist size. So there seems to have been a dispute between Ryan and RVJ regarding wrist growth in arm wrestling. Ryan seems to be in the camp that arm wrestling will absolutely increase the girth of the wrist, and RVJ seems to be of the position that size increase is largely due to drug use, and to promote the idea as otherwise is disingenuous. Well, the wrist itself is quite sparse of soft tissue if looking at the proper wrist. It is only tendons, bone, and cartilage. But Ryan chooses to measure slightly further down, moving into the forearm, where muscle bellies begin to widen off the tendon, so naturally this part is more possible to hypertrophy in a typical sense. He also talks about bone and tendon thickening, which can happen, but usually bones get denser and more solid using Wolff's Law, rather than entirely thicker. Tendons too, rather than simply swelling outwards with hypertrophy, thicken internally by forming greater bonds between each of the aligned fibers to become more stiff and spring-like than soft and flexible, which is probably a leading factor in long-term arm wrestlers' elbows being shortened and fixed in flexion at resting. So combined with the relatively slow growth rate, outward tendon hypertrophy seems minimal at best. This aligns with RVJ's assessment of there being little there but bones and tendons and veins and stuff. They both also talk about farm work and manual labour as possible routes to wrist thickening, which could allow for tendon density and bone strengthening. But I would think that this, and in arm wrestling training, a large amount of growth in the wrist would be more down to general soft tissue trauma than specific growth. This would be things like excessive wrist strap loading, especially with thin or rougher straps, in the same way that manual labour develop thicker, calloused skin through repetitive work. People who regularly wrap their wrists with straps, either in match or training against pulleys or loading weight directly on it, are likely to develop thick and or inflamed skin around the wrist as a protective response to the abuse they put on it. The soft tissue inside too can become inflamed. There are two bands of fascia which wrap around the wrist at exactly the point people usually measure it. The extensor retinaculum on the back or the top of the wrist and the palmar carpal ligament on the underside. This is the part that gets inflamed and compressed in carpal tunnel syndrome by sitting and pressing it against a desk repeatedly. These sit here to hold the tendons in place, and these are made from soft organic tissue, which means they're also possible to swell and inflame, likely through acute or chronic injury or abuse. So yes, through this method the wrist could thicken outwards, but it would be not a particularly positive thing for anything except injury and the body attempting injury protection. RVJ asks why old generation's hands are thicker than the current, and he correctly brings up the soft tissue use and abuse. Combine this with the levels of alcoholism, or even just passive drinking of it chronically in the general population then and now, especially in labourers, which we still see now, and we can guess too that the labourers of that time would suffer from the reddened and swollen hands that alcohol creates due to chronic dehydration and imbalances of electrolytes due to drinking mostly only alcohol. Combined with the soft tissue trauma of labourers and perhaps more extreme workload compared to the modern, more automated and regulated systems, this seems like a good recipe for thickened wrists. The next point is drugs. Aside from the hypertrophic attributes of these, there is also the common attribute of steroids and growth hormone, that they flood the body parts with nutrients and general bloating. This can vary between drugs and hormone levels, but obviously bodybuilders want the muscles swollen with the skin and fat cells remaining depleted, which they are able to manipulate quite well through chemical control. But essentially, people on these drugs are more full and swollen, and also more prone to higher levels of inflammation due to heightened hormone responses and the ability to invite greater amounts of trauma to the tissue through greater workloads, which anabolic steroids allow. The final factor which I feel is being overlooked is that throughout his career, from what I can see, Ryan has gained a significant amount of body weight, and this is not all lean muscle tissue, so this alone would account for an increase in wrist circumference. Obese people have larger wrists than the anorexic. But all of these individual factors seem to me a quite comprehensive set of reasons why Ryan may have seen wrist growth throughout his career in arm wrestling. But as RVJ points out, it is unlikely that much of this growth is functional or beneficial to his performance. Although, siding with Ryan, you could say that all these factors are a part of arm wrestling, so in this sense arm wrestling could help develop wrist girth. And finally, I just want to give a big thanks to Armwrestling Newz for blowing up this topic, since it gives a very interesting discussion beyond the drama and disputes, which is my hope and intention with this channel for a direction that the sport can move towards in the coming years. That is, a more comprehensive and documented system with proper planning and programming to allow easier and more reliable access for future athletes. But that's about it. Remember, if you like this video, then like the video, and I'll like you. Subscribe too if you feel inclined, and I'll see you later.